Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Mastodon. I don't know whether it was actually, funnily enough, it was. I think you were probably the second or third person that I connected with on there. And nowadays, I think the only thing I do on Mastodon is post my running attempt.
You're doing more than I am on that site. It had great promise. I think at least for our ecosystem, I had trouble getting people to move, and I think it's a great case study for, is not so much so you build it and people come, right? Because when it comes to social media, it needs to deliver value, right? What's the value? Is people want to see people. You want to hang out with people that you're not, regularly meeting in person. And so it's a space, and people gravitate towards space that people are already on, because it is so much harder to try to bring forth people to something new. And right, not to mention, you remember, in the very beginning when we had this mass exodus to Mastodon, one of the biggest hurdle was it's not the easiest to navigate.
No, it is confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing. I mean, I give them a lot of kudos for making changes and for the community to step up and say, hey, here are things that you can do. So there were a lot of helpful people, but I believe that's one of the biggest challenge, not just Mastodon and a lot of other services, is you just need people. It's very simple.
Exactly, it's a chicken and egg. Listen, thank you so much for joining us today, Theo. It's our pleasure to have you as our very, very first guest on the wonderful podcast. So you may know Carmen and I managed to do 6 whole episodes talking to each other, which was, I think, as a father and daughter, quite an achievement in and of itself.
I need to learn that, by the way. Yes.
I did say that out loud, yeah. But yes, wonderful podcast, season 2, episode 1, and delighted to welcome Theodora Lau as our very first guest to the show. So thank you, Theo.
Thank you so much for having me. Finally, we can actually talk instead of text.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and also we've done a fair bit of that on LinkedIn and so on. So yeah, it'll be great. And I've got a feeling from your podcast that you're over in London in the not too distant future. So we might actually get to meet up.
That will be lovely. Yes, I do try to spend at least 3-4 trips in London every year. Is one of my favorite cities. So.
Fantastic. I look forward to that. So for our listeners that may not be familiar with Theo, tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, and time on a tradition, a bit of background, and a little bit on Unconventional Ventures as well, which kind of piques my interest.
Sure. I think that the easiest way to describe myself, I tell people that, is I'm a troublemaker. I ask questions. I ask a lot of questions, and people don't always appreciate the questions. But my background is tech. It's always been tech. So I came from engineering. I spent 20 years in telco, IT, built systems, take systems apart. And that's what I thought my life was going to be like. At one point, I thought, well, I'll be pretty happy settling in as a solution architecture. That's kind of cool, putting boxes together. And life happens. And I have 2 wonderful children, which I adore dearly when they don't talk back. And I took a break. I think that if I were to look at my career path for the last 30 years, I would say the first one was, the big turning point was having my first child and taking a break. And I was very lucky. I got a long break. I got sabbatical leave. I got everything I wanted. And then I was like, that might not be the right job I wanted to do, because I was constantly traveling. It was a normal week was an 80-hour week. Wow. And I'm like, well, what else? What else is out here? And I started looking, and I had no idea. This was a very privileged me. I had no idea it would be so hard to find a job after you become a mother. My husband didn't have trouble, but as a woman, this is looking back at 15 years ago, people were like, can you still work? Really? How long can you work? There were all these doubts and questions. And if you didn't know, it would almost sound like I had a brain surgery, or I lost half my brain or something, which clearly wasn't the case. Make a long story short, it was very, very hard. I took a huge pay cut to be able to come back to work in a different company. And I decided, okay, you know what? that's not going to work. And at that time, there was a nonprofit in DC that was hiring. It was a good friend of mine, and they were looking for something around healthcare innovation, health tech. And I said, well, let me jump on it. And that was my first foray into looking at the needs and wants and well-being of older adults. And I loved what I did, and it got really depressing really, really fast. And every day you're looking at, oh, what are the determinants of health, and what can you do so we can live longer? You can't really live longer unless you have the means to do it financially. You can't really tell people you need to live healthy, eat healthy, and have a healthy lifestyle if you work 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and you get off work at midnight, and the only thing you have is a fast food place. And so that was my second pivot, is looking at, what, maybe we should flip the story a little bit. Instead of looking at health longevity, we need to look at financial security. And that the rest was history. I started my own company, Unconventional Ventures. It was called Unconventional because I wanted to look at financial inclusion and well-being of older adults and immigrants and people that we don't typically think about. And that's why I call it unconventional, because a lot of people were not interested in it. I got laughed off quite a few times by people on stage and off stage. One of the most memorable ones was, we don't do old people. That was very interesting. What do you mean you don't do old people? So that's been my journey, is looking at how we can bring people together to create solutions or leverage existing solutions to create something better and easier that can be useful to benefit consumers. And I look at a lot of things outside of the US because I believe truly, truly in diversity, not in just the sense of diversity of gender and ethnic groups, but diversity in backgrounds and upbringing. There are lots that we can learn in different ecosystems.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that. Sorry, I'm jumping in. I know Carmen's got a question to ask, but you say 15 years ago, when after the career break, do you get a sense that much has changed? Has it changed in anywhere near the degree that it needs to change, or what's your view, Theo?
There is a perception of change, and then there is the real change. The latter, I would say, is lacking. There is definitely more awareness that we need to change, but translating awareness to execution is very hard. At the end of the day, if you look at how our society is set up, right? Venture capital, for example, is meant to go after the next shiny toy. The next shiny toy typically isn't really the not sexy things, looking at, well-being of people. And I think that also comes from the people who found the companies. I remember when I was still with a nonprofit, the first cohort that we put together, and it was not intentional. Looking back, it was really interesting case study. I was looking for startups. I was scouting all around the US for startups. That was actually why I ended up on social media. And the cohort I put together was so diverse, not just in terms of gender, but age. There were a lot of founders in there that were starting their own company in the 50s and 60s even, and then I'm going to be 51 this year. So looking at a lot of why do people start company, why do they feel certain passion about something, is because of the lived experience, something they can relate to. And so if you look at, the people that are willing to look at, the older adults or the caregiving cohort, typically they are older. And that's not typically the people that VC funds.
And there's no way of shortcutting that experience. That experience is born out of those years on the planet. There's no doubt about it. It's such valuable stuff.
It's lived experience.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you touched on there, and you mentioned it a lot in your book and stuff, the forgotten demographics, and you've touched a bit on how the elderly and stuff are often forgotten. Who do you think those other demographics are? Why are they being forgotten? And who do you think it is that's forgetting them? And what can we do more so that doesn't keep happening?
I think the interesting thing is dissecting the word elder. Because as often as we like to lump everything into these are the seniors, these are the elders, what exactly does that mean, right? If you look back at since early 1900s, we've gained extra 20, 30 years of healthy living.
Yeah.
Does senior still mean the same thing? I look at my own career path. I started the company in my 40s. Well, my parents retired. My mom retired when she was 49. My dad retired when he was 51. So looking at that, I really should have been retired. I should be senior, but am I senior? No, I don't think so. So I think the first thing is to reframe what we think about aging, what we think about longevity. And you can't really lump everyone 50 above into a same bucket. We are not the same, just like we don't lump everyone younger than 50 into one bucket because it's very different as well. So I think that's the rethinking that we need to do. Unfortunately, that's really hard to do. And that's part of what we call forgotten demographics, not just forgotten from an age perspective, but also forgotten because of what they do. Caregivers, right? That's an easy one to think about. Typical caregivers are in the 40s, women with 2 children. But more and more often, actually, in the United States, 60% of the first-time caregivers are millennials and Gen Zs.
Wow.
And that number change depends on the ethnic demographics. For example, for Asian Americans, a quarter of the caregivers, I think, don't quote me, are really, really young. And so because, I think the median age of Asian Americans in the US are like 19. So it depends on your living arrangements. If you're a multi-generational household living together, it depends on where you live and all of those factors. So, but I would argue that that whole group of people, their needs is forgotten. We don't think about it. People take career breaks. How do we deal with that? I don't know. People deal with it. Women typically have to change jobs, find something more flexible so they can take care of not just their children, but also their parents. Again, how do we support them financially? We don't know. And that all of that translate to gender gap, gender imparity as they get older. There is a reason why women tend to be less financially well off as we get older.
Oh, it's interesting. I was listening to a news story on the BBC just this morning on caregivers allowance, and I may be misquoting here, but I'm sure the number I heard was you've got to be giving at least 35 hours a week of care before you qualify for that allowance. And as one of the journalists quite rightly pointed out, it's a joke because people are giving so much more time than that anyway in just giving that care. And then they finish that day and they're providing care to someone else, maybe the kids, or whoever it might be. So it's relentless. It doesn't stop.
And then the allowance you get is minuscule. Yeah. Like, I think it was like 50, 60 quid a week or something that I heard the other day as well, which is just not going to do anything.
No, it doesn't. And there's also the perception of care, right? Depends on who you ask. Some people don't perceive it as a burden. They don't perceive it as caregiving. And I think the hitter also is, financially speaking, not just them giving up the time to do the work, but also I see that in my own family. A couple of years ago when my grandmother fell and my uncle had to remodel the house because he has a single family home. There is expenses, right? In remodeling, there's expenses in hiring help. And oftentimes that comes unexpected. There is no means right now to help people save for it and plan for it. And my question is, why not?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that was another one of the stats that I caught today was it was a lady that said she calculated over the last, I think probably 10 years, that she'd contributed £105,000 just in actual real hard cash in providing care for a family member. And I think another one I kind of picked up, I had the news on in the background, so I was kind of half paying attention, but people are contributing as much as the NHS is contributing in this space, which is just terrifying, really.
It is, right? And we're not getting younger.
No, no, absolutely not.
So, I mean, look, and that's precisely where I go back to thinking when I first started in the space is we are aware we are getting older, especially in the US. We are aware that we're going to run out of money with Social Security, which 1 in 5 older adults is dependent on it, and it's going to run out of money in a decade. So 10 years from now. why are we not doing something? We knew it was going to run out 10 years ago. So, it's taken us more than 10 years and we have not moved. So if public sector policymakers are not changing, then my next question would be, what about banks? What about credit unions? What about employers? Because all of these stress goes into the people that go to work, right? You want the people to be productive. You need to find ways to help get some stress away from their plate.
And I think as well, a lot of the stuff that's done is reactive rather than proactive, and that you're waiting for someone to have a fall, you're waiting for someone to be really ill. The same with healthcare in general. I think there's so much we could do that's preventative to stop it from getting that bad. Like, I know our grandma's had handrails and stuff installed, but it wasn't until you get to a stage where you really, really need them and maybe have already got injured from falling that those sorts of help is provided, that sort of help's provided.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of things are preventable, right? And just like what you were saying, if you can act upfront, the cost will be less.
Yeah. And the stress for the family, and yeah,
exactly.
for sure.
So this feels like a very different space, or does it, from the topic of your latest book and your interest in things like AI? So is there an overlap again for our listeners, and what is it if it is? How can we exploit technologies like that?
There is actually a cross, and the reason why I sprinkle a lot of AI magic dust in what I do and what I say is this actually went back to the time when I was working in the nonprofit, and we're looking at health tech, right? So what are some of the things that, from a preventative perspective, forget about data and privacy and space intrusion, which I have my own thoughts about, IoT devices in the house to, monitor, wearable devices to measure your gait and to know when you fall, means and tools to basically look at your personal health and create some sort of personalized medicine. So a lot of that is what technology can do and will be able to do from a healthcare perspective. And that was why I started looking at, well, what about financial services? AI has been in use for quite a while now. If we look at, for example, looking at the check image, right? To be able to see the digits on the checks. I know you guys don't use checks, but we still do. So when you deposit it, to be able to scan the digits on the check, that's part of machine learning. So, and a lot of the back-end processes, automation of that has been using AI. So if we take a step forward and look at how we drive today, you hop into the car and you don't even think twice. You follow the GPS. In the old days, I'm old enough to remember we had to print maps. God forbid you got lost in the middle of the road, like, okay, all right, let me guess where I am and let me find a way, which always make it a very, very stressful experience. But now we don't have to do that. We have a phone, we have GPS. It reroutes us when there's traffic. It reroutes us if we want to make an extra stop. Why can't we do that with our money? Why can't we have a financial GPS, a personal finance GPS that can help me not just look at where I am right now, not just tell me how much money I can afford for coffee, which is really silly, but looking at forward. I am going to be 51 this year. My kids are still young. My oldest one is going to be in secondary school. So if I look at 10 years from now, when I'm 61, my kids will be in the middle of college, hopefully, if we can afford it. And then my parents will be 90. Think about the financial impact and the financial need that I will have to manage 3 different households. How do I support my kids? How do I support my parents? How do I support myself? No sane person can do that. I can't crunch the numbers. I don't even know what to do. And that's been my question for the last 10 years. You need data, you need predictive analysis, you need to know exactly what the surroundings are and make educated guesses and reiterate and reinforce learning as we go through our life. that is a perfect use case for
It's a
AI.
tremendous analogy, the GPS analogy. I love that. It's really good. It helped me visualize that perfectly. And talking about that kind of tech as well, Carmen will remember, as does my wife, we had experience of that firsthand with my Garmin watch when I had a bike accident in London.
Yeah.
And they were alerted. It was on the way to work, so they were alerted very swiftly that I'd had an. Garmin worded it very, very tactfully. There's been an incident, not an accident. I thought that was a careful choice of words. We're not telling you what the incident was, but no, it was good. It was really good seeing that actually operate so effectively.
Yeah, we just got a text and then Mum and I drove to go and pick you up. It was great.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, there's so many use cases for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All ended well. So for my Carmen's obviously my eldest daughter. My middle daughter's a literature student, and she was really curious about the whole writing books process. So she had a couple of questions, if you don't mind. It was about kind of drafting processes and how you go about that. And I guess the whole business of getting published. I know you're with Kogan Page, and they publish a lot of books, and you've got a lot of peers that are published with Kogan in the same kind or similar kinds of space. Can you share anything about that with us as well?
Can I say something controversial? I'm not a writer. I am so seriously. This has always been the funny story. My background is engineering. I work with numbers. I work with flowcharts. My brain works like a flowchart. I can't really comprehend something unless I can draw it out in a flow. And so I never thought of writing a book. I actually didn't start writing articles until I was in the nonprofit because I need to find a way to tell the story. We had tons of numbers. We have tons of stats. And how do we tell a story to others who we want them to join in the community? So that was back in 2015 when I started writing articles. And fast forward 2019, before COVID, I got a call from one of the commissioning editor in Kogan Page and said, "Hey, we like your articles. Would you like to write a book?" I'm like, "Are you joking? Me, a book? No, you don't want that." It was interesting. So anyway, I ended up co-authoring with my business partner at the time, and then the book was born. So if you were to ask me, what does it take to write a book, to draft a book, and to get it published, I would say a lot of that was luck. And I'll be very honest, it was luck, it was serendipity. It just happened that she saw my LinkedIn post. I wasn't even like writing for Forbes or anything. I just put them on LinkedIn. See, another reason why I love social.
But yeah, I was going to say, you say luck, but a lot of people say you kind of create your own luck. And certainly not only the volume, but the quality of output that I see on your LinkedIn. I know you were saying you're struggling with all of your other commitments to keep it up, but it is just amazing the kind of depth and breadth of knowledge and always incredibly well communicated. So I'm not surprised that you got that approach, but it feels unusual, definitely, to have an approach from the publisher rather than have an agent kind of pushing your work out there. And well done, you. That's amazing.
I know. That's why I always say I've been very lucky in a lot of sense. I think, look, all jokes aside, one of the things I always tell people is not just have a passion for what you do, but know why you do what you do, right? Your raison d'être, for lack of better words. Why do you wake up in the morning? Why do I put stuff on LinkedIn? Why do I go meet with people? Why do I go on stage? There is a message that I want to get out to the community. And I've been so lucky to have a platform of people who I can exchange ideas with. So use that for good. That's been my reason of getting up every morning, is use the platform for good. I don't need everyone to agree with me. It's perfectly okay if what I can do can change the hearts and minds of a few people, and those few people have the means to go out and then change the hearts and minds of a few others in the ecosystem, then I think it's worth working for.
Completely agree.
Well, I think it was a really good book. I'm not finished it yet, but I've been reading through it and I think it's great.
Thank you.
Honestly. And I think it really ties in because our strapline for the podcast is doing good, doing well and being well. and I think it ties in so nicely. Like, I've really found a lot in common when reading it, so it's been great.
Thank you. We wrote that during COVID. It was not intentional.
It's amazing.
but we were putting the flow together and the chapters together. We actually we did two things. We ended up redoing some of the original content because we wanted to weave in the pandemic at that time. When we were writing it, it's still pretty much a lot of unknowns. There were a lot of, uncertainty. And another thing that we did, we erased 10,000 words of our own, so that we can add in other people's quotes. So in there were case studies from people. There was a foreword that was written by Ida from Aspen Institute. There was a middle section that was written by Sunrise Banks. And that was on purpose because I wanted people to hear their story, because I look at the book and I look at a lot of the work as it's for the community. I don't write it for me. I wanted to write it as a way for the community to pitch in. So that's what that's for. Yes, we had to reduce 10,000 words. That was painful. But
I think anyone who's starting a business, or even if you've already got one, it's a really great book to just make you think about things in a different way. I thought it was really interesting.
Excellent. Just Carmen, I think you had a question on open banking, but if before we do that, can I just, because it feels like a good opportunity to circle back to almost the start of the conversation and how you got started. And one of the things that I wanted to ask, times have changed, 15 years have gone by and so on, but what is it like being a highly regarded female in what are certainly perceived to be, and again, I know this is changing a little bit for the better, but the industries, the sectors that you've been, even in telecoms, I think it's kind of fairly male dominated, and fintech and AI. Do you believe in role models? Is a role model a good thing? Is it no longer necessary? Just some thoughts around that, Theo, from your perspective.
Whoa, how much time do you have? Let's go back in time for a little bit. So I went to an all-girls Catholic school backdrop, 12 years. And then I ended up in RPI, which is a really technical school, university in upstate New York. I did engineering. That school is not really known for diversity in any sort of sense. So for 4 years, as I did my Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering, of all things, I kept getting reminded and kept getting told that you're here because you're a woman and you're Chinese, because they need to check the box. Oh, lovely. So I'm like, okay, this is school. Let's see. And then I worked in IT and telco. And you're absolutely right. It's very male dominated. Majority of the people on my team, which was in the US, in Israel, in India, across three, mostly men. Especially the team in the US, it was mostly men. There were no women. I think there was maybe one woman, and that was it. And it didn't even dawn on me that this was odd, because I came from university. I was one of 3 women in my class. So I'm like, okay, this is weird, but all right, fine, whatever. And I got used to it. It's amazing how quickly you get used to, you thought this was the normal thing to do.
Yeah.
Until I had my child, and I realized how expensive it is to get healthcare, to get childcare. I realized how impossible it is to get childcare, because in Hong Kong it was very easy. In Hong Kong, people have 1 nanny per child. You have 2 kids, fine, 2 nannies. Mm-hmm. I never thought it would be a barrier until I had my child. So that was a big adjustment, and that was actually the first time it opened my eyes into what is wrong with this ecosystem. This is not right. And then coupled with my experience of having the struggle to be able to come back to work, I think that was what added to layer to it. And so I became more aware. But before that, no, I didn't know. And to your question with role modeling, I think it's helpful to know that you're not by yourself. Although I always say my role model is my mother. She is, everything that she does, how she changed her career so that she can spend more time with me, and how she never changed her last name, which I never did either. I learned from her. And just the way that how she split the housework with my dad, so that for me it became a norm. I thought it was normal for fathers, for husbands to cook dinner. My dad was always, and is still, the chef. He takes care of a lot of the things in the house. I thought that was normal.
What a fabulous role model to have.
I know, right?
It
I'm like,
really is.
wait,
It really
can I
is.
clone you now, Dad? But I didn't realize, right? So this goes back to the lived experience, and it goes back to diversity, from the sense of, depends on where you come from, because it was the past 20 years, 15 years has been eye-opening for me. And I wouldn't have known until I made the choices I made.
I remember my wife saying to me that she was keeping her name when we got married, and not that it was ever a question. It just never occurred to me. It was one of those things that, you just assume. I'm going back 33, 34 years. And, you just assumed at that time that your wife would take your name. Why? And then when she said, well, why would I? And I thought, well, actually, why would you? There's absolutely no good reason for you to do that. And so she didn't. And
Exactly.
I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I didn't either. It's a family thing, apparently. None of my aunts changed their names either. And I didn't realize it was going to be a trouble until I started traveling with my children.
Yeah. Oh, no, Carmen will tell you some experiences there. And right now, we talk about technology, but even some of the airlines trying to enter two names because, Spanish heritage. So it's two surnames a lot of the time, and trying to enter them as two surnames, particularly when one of your surnames is James, just causes so much confusion and absolute turmoil.
But I think when we lived in Oman as well, that was problematic, mum not having your surname. Well, I think in general, traveling without the husband at that period was problematic in general. If a mother was traveling with her children when we lived in Oman years ago.
Yeah.
I still have trouble 2 years ago.
Wow.
That tells you how much we have not changed as a society. Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Which is a great segue into open banking, Carmen, and your question on different.
Yes, so wonderful. Our business at the moment is basically focused a lot on small businesses, and we also do a lot of work with charities. And the great thing about open banking is how much more affordable it is compared to card payments, obviously, for the merchant and for the charity who would cover those costs. I don't think it's quite taken off in the US the way it has in the UK yet, but do you see that happening, and what do you think the driving force behind that will need to be? I guess, do you think it's going to have to come from the merchants or the consumers, or how do you see that happening?
It's an interesting question. I think US is a very odd place. Like I said earlier, we are also one of the few countries that still love our checks. As a matter of fact, the highest fraud last year, as well as this year probably, are check frauds.
Really?
Yes, it is. It is. We still write checks and we wonder why we get fraud. But that aside, I think a lot of that has to come from actually creating value for consumers. And right now, if we look at where we are, I like my bank, kind of. I don't love it. It doesn't completely work. Would I want to have a different choice of a fintech or a big tech that allow me to do more things that rides on an open banking infrastructure, get things easier, faster, or even cheaper? I would love to, but then again, I have all of these things already established with my current Main Street bank. It's going to be a lot of work to move things over. And I think that's one of the things recently, actually, I talked to someone about on surveys. There have been many surveys that people talk about, if given a choice, would you go to an alternative way of banking instead of going with your incumbent banks that we have for XYZ? People always say yes, majority, right? They don't trust the bank. They don't like the services. And like, for example, mine, I can't even deposit a check with my app. I have to go to the bank branch. Would I love a different way of doing things that will be easier? Absolutely. But then beyond the survey, when you actually talk to the people, you look at the small businesses, a lot of them are still cash based.
Yep.
right? And so there is a would I like to versus would I actually do it given the circumstance that we have. And I think we need to get through that. And the reason why I would venture a guess we are slow is because we have an established infrastructure. It's not perfect, but it's been here for a long time.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of a lot of the drivers. It's a difficult one. It's a question we're often asked. Can see the benefit for a merchant. It's clear there's a 90+% saving on transaction processing, but what drives the consumer to adoption? And from our point of view, it's actually the 90+% saving that the merchant benefits that drives the adoption, because that can be so usefully used elsewhere. Yeah, one of our customers is a case in point. One of our customers is a used car dealer, and they sold a car just today, and the savings on the transaction, as opposed to that going through, typically they'd probably take that payment for a debit card. That transaction would have cost them about £375. It cost them a penny using open banking. So how does the consumer benefit? Well, obviously, if some of those costs actually do get filtered down, those savings to the consumer, then that becomes a huge benefit and probably a huge driver. But you're right. I think there are a lot of areas, particularly in that cash-based environment, where it's possibly not as useful. Certainly, I think we're seeing right now, until you get adoption in things like Apple Wallet, those low transaction value, buying a cup of coffee in a cafe or somewhere, you're not going to move that to open banking anytime soon. But I think it's just interesting. We get asked a lot, because Carmen and I guest on podcasts, a lot of them are US based, and we tend to get the same thing. This is absolutely incredible, and why is it not happening here? And it's a question that I'm often asked, and struggle to give a meaningful answer as to when it's going to happen and why it's taking so long.
It's funny you mentioned cafe. A lot of cafes in the US, actually, they say they give you a discount if you use cash.
That's kind of the same thing that I think when people say how a merchant's going to get customers to adopt it, you just have to find incentives for the customers. So whether it's a discount because you've selected open banking at checkout instead of paying on your debit card, free shipping, things like that, I guess it has to be the merchant trying to drive that change in user behavior.
Well, but you bring up an interesting point, though, because from a consumer perspective, do they actually care it's open banking? Or they just care that this is an easy way to pay?
I think no, I don't think they care that it's open banking. And I think, people you speak to, people don't know what it is. They've got no idea what open banking means. It's a terrible name, for one thing. It's completely confusing and misleading.
I'm sure if you did a survey and asked people, have you ever done an open banking transaction, most would say no, but they don't realise that, here in the UK, when you pay off your credit card, I'd say 99% of them these days are using open banking. You just don't realise that act of clicking and selecting your bank and paying that way, that is open banking.
Yeah. And similarly, tax with HMRC, they're seeing massive adoption in paying taxes in the UK. But you're right. I think that consumer adoption needs to have some benefit. And I think what we've seen in the UK, and I think this is quite universal, talking to a lot of providers, is kind of 85 to 90% return rate once you've done one transaction, because it is simple, fast and secure, and you're not entering 16 digits of CVV and expiry date, first line of address, zip code. It's literally tap and pay. I think that will also drive adoption, because it's that simplicity of making the payment and the additional security. You're not sharing your card details with anyone, which is a huge benefit.
I think, as Theo says as well, though, a lot of the driving needs to come from the banks, because if you have a bank with an app that's really not friendly, that you really struggle to get into or anything like that, that experience of open banking isn't going to be a good one. So not only does it need to come from the merchants, it needs to come from your bank as well.
And ultimately from the regulator, probably, that's putting those standards in place to make sure that the banks are adhering to them.
There is that too. And I think you can probably pose the same question to Canada, because that's one of the questions that Barbara and I often talk about. Is Canada going to see open banking anytime soon? And last year she said no. And this year she's still saying no.
Really? Again, it's, again, from a European perspective, we often cite Canada as being kind of, good foot forward with it. But that's not the experience on the ground then. Okay, interesting. Well, that's fascinating. Thanks, Theo, for that.
We talk a good game, though.
So that again, sorry?
We talk a good game.
Oh, we do that very, very well as well. Absolutely. We don't want to take up too much of your time, but I've got a couple more questions. And one again, if you don't mind, if I just go back to this whole idea of kind of parenthood and all of that, it's you are really, really busy. The output is incredible, and you're traveling and speaking and so on. And I guess that the question is an obvious one, but balancing all of that with the home life, you clearly had a great role model in your mother and your father and so on. But any tips you can share on that, on the kind of being well aspect of our podcast, I guess?
Absolutely not being well from a health perspective. Oops, sorry. It's often the running joke. I am the absolute worst role model for my children. 6 double espressos a day, sign me up. I sleep about 3 to 4 hours a day. Bad. I am trying to change it. I actually I used to run. I used to do half marathons. COVID basically killed all of my habits, healthy habits, and brought up all the bad habits. So I need to get back into it. I've tried. The traveling part doesn't help because I can't adjust to time zone changes. So I ended up just working. And then it became a habit. So there is really no magic bullet. I did say that I'm taking class 2, right? Okay. Just at that, I get bored. I want to learn something new. So I'm actually taking classes. But I think it goes back to what drive you, right? There's so much going on in this space. I can't do it all. I would love to slow down, and I do sometimes. I took my first vacation earlier this year, which that was the first in maybe 20 years, something like that. I can't remember. So I congratulated myself. That's small steps. I often say if you want to change a habit, it's bite-sized steps, little ones, so that you can feel accomplished, that you can feel like you can continue on. Being open and honest. I think society set us up for you can do it all. No, BS, sorry. You cannot do it all. We often say, well, if you try hard enough, you can do it all. No, you can't. I do it as a math equation, and that's how I explain to my kids. You have 24 hours a day. It's fixed. You cannot create time. Then you take out the time that the things you have to do, get the meals ready, run errands, pick up the kids from school, and we split that. So you take that chunk out, and then you look at the remaining time that you have, and that's your time management. And I'm awful at it. But when you start adding up everything that you have a day, that was my way of explaining to them why I am not sleeping as much, why I'm, working on weekends. And it's a hard balance. I don't have a good magic bullet. I do say running is great, though. Running is normally when I get my ideas for writing. I start dictating when I run. I take pauses, and I've had many occasions I end up with an entire article after I get done running. So
I think that I would agree entirely with that. And Carmen's a new convert to running, so she'll share some of that. But I would agree. I think it's that fact that you're taking a phone with you, I'm guessing, to do some dictation and so on, and I do the same. Though for many years I didn't take a phone, so I would just it would give me a real escape from the computer, and I would find that my head really did solve a few problems when I was out there, and then I'd do a brain dump when I got in of things that I could remember.
Take breaks, right? Yeah.
I probably don't stop and dictate or anything like that, but if there's something that I feel like, I've just remembered an answer I need to give to somebody, I might stop and pop that on Discord or Slack or whatever. But no, it works for me. I think that point that you make about the expectation, from advertisers and everyone else that's thrust upon us that we should all be getting out there and doing all this stuff, it creates an additional pressure on everyone.
It does the opposite of what it's supposedly doing.
Yeah,
it makes you more really stressed.
Exactly, right? And I remember this vividly. Oh gosh, this was quite a few years ago. It was right around the same time when my kids were little, and that was one time my son was in elementary school, primary school, and he mentioned to me that there was like an event or something at school. I can't remember exactly what event. And I found out, and I said, "Oh, when is it going to be? I would love to be there." And that's what little kids do, right? They're so honest with no filter. He said right away, he's like, "Why does it matter? You won't be able to make it anyway."
Oh,
And I'm like, ouch, ouch. That hurts.
yeah.
Because then, you can see the disappointment in his face. He doesn't come out and say, "I am not happy that you're always gone," but you can get it through the words that he say. And I could also sense that other kids' parents are always there, right? And then it makes you feel like, oh, I am not being the proper mother because I can't, do all these things and go to all of these recitals and everything.
Very smart child though as well, clearly playing the game there, sowing those seeds of guilt and
Oh my God, guilt trip, right?
absolutely, absolutely. No, that's great. And I think as you say, everybody's different. If it works for you, it works for you. I'm sure I couldn't possibly now manage on 2 or 3 hours sleep a night. But amazing.
I don't recommend it.
No.
I do not recommend it. All the studies point to the fact that it's actually going to give you early dementia. So I'm absolutely aware of the fact that I need to change. I'm working on it. It's a work in progress.
Carmen, any other questions from you before we get on to our closing?
No, I think we can move to the tip of the week that we're going to start. Basically, starting this season, we want to introduce a tip of the week, which is just something current that ties into doing good, doing well, or being well. It can be something that is a book, an article, something you've read lately, a TV program, podcast, person, or any sort of service that you've used. So I'm happy to kick off with mine. As we just touched on, running. My whole life thought I couldn't run, hated running, to the point where at school I chose to be a hockey goalkeeper because it meant that I could just stand in goal and not run.
I take it as you're tall too.
Really? I'm not that tall, no, not that tall, but I was just like, that's perfect. I don't have to run around the pitch, so I'll just stand in goal and not move. But then, I don't know, recently I just thought, I'm 31, I can't believe I've never ran, I've avoided it all my life. I'm just going to try and run a 5K at the gym on the treadmill. And I said, I want to do it in under 30 minutes. And I managed to do it in 29 minutes and 59 seconds. A lot of it was just speeding up the treadmill as I realized time was running out. I think I had an advantage doing it on the treadmill. But that kind of made me realize I really enjoyed it. And my tip of the week is, if you have always thought about running and never done it, I really finally understood how great the Nike strapline is of just do it, because it really is just do it. So I've downloaded the Nike Running Club app, and I would really recommend that for everyone. It's completely free. They've got a coach on there called Coach Bennett who will basically motivate you on your runs. You can set, like, I don't know, you want to run your first 5K, you want to run your first 10K, and they'll map out a plan for you for 5, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, depending on how long you want to train, and do all your runs for you. And yeah, that's my tip of the week, to just do it, basically.
That's fantastic.
And download that app.
Flying completely in the face of everything that we just said about advertisers and putting the pressure on there. But why not?
Pressure.
Exactly. Just highlights we're all different.
I sort it out. Like, it's not like it came to me. I just decided to. I then researched what apps, and that's just the one that I fell on. But yeah, if you are thinking about it, I think it's really helped clear my head. It makes me go out every day for at least 30 minutes a day for a run and get some daylight rather than sitting in my room or at the office. So
that is important.
Theo, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I am not the best giving advice. But if anything, I would say read and read more. Pick anything to read, but not digitally. I highly recommend picking up an actual physical book with paper, and pick something that you want to read. It's fascinating. I often hear people say, "Well, I don't have time to read," but you know what? Just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and that's all you need. And that's one of the things I often do when I travel. I always find a local bookstore to go to. It's like my decompression my
Yeah.
decompression zone. I just need to hide somewhere and I just need to be there with the books. The books do not judge me and I get to pick whatever I want. If the topic looks interesting, the cover looks interesting, or the authors. And while you're at it, read more women authors. We need more female voices. We need more readership that appreciate the viewpoints of different people. Oftentimes when you see people come up with a list of, oh, here's 10 good reads of the day, guarantee you 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, are from male authors. Let's read from different perspectives, different authors. One of my favorite one I'm just finishing is called Unmasking AI. And it talks about Dr. Joy's journey of realizing and discovering the racial bias in facial recognition technology. And it was eye-opening. I'm like, oh, now this makes sense. There are a lot of things that, just like my own experience from a long time ago, I took it for granted. Oh yeah, there are no women. Well, maybe they're not interested. No. There are other reasons that end up surfacing what we see. And so it's good to ask questions. It's good to read. So you can ask even more questions.
That's fabulous. And I'm completely with you on the paper versus digital, because for me, it's a completely different experience. Everything about it, that serendipity of going into a bookshop and going through the bookshelves rather than just, again, getting a recommendation through Amazon or wherever else. It's a totally different thing. Question though, do you ever, you read the blurbs and you look at the cover and so on, and I was reading something the other day, and someone was saying they often open the book and read the first maybe paragraph, and it's that I find really odd. I would never do that. I feel like that's kind of encroaching on the author's words. I might read the back, but not the start of the story. Do you ever do that?
I read the last chapter.
Do you?
First. I was just telling someone the other day.
For nonfiction.
Or nonfiction. I do.
For fiction.
Yeah, most of the things I do nonfiction. Even newspapers, I always read from the back first. I don't know why.
Wow.
It's very odd. I am not a normal individual, I would admit that. But I always like to read the last chapter because I wanted to see what they think. And typically they leave what they really feel about a topic, not in the front, but in the end. I want to see how they wrap up the story. I want to see what else they want to tell that is not in there. And normally that's where you get the gems.
You see, it's not unconventional ventures for no reason at all. Your approach is unconventional right across the board. That's fantastic. I love it.
Yes. What about your tip?
My tip, this is desperate because we're going to sound like a couple of health nuts, but my tip is also a running app today. So I apologize for anyone listening. We do talk about other stuff from time to time. I find it amazing, actually, because Carmen's newness to running is...
I've been running 4 weeks, just to preface, like...
Is it 4? Yeah. It feels like a little bit more than that.
No, it's week 4. I've just started week 5 on my Nike running club.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Keep it up. That's very good.
So it's kind of quite odd having Carmen speak about running all the time because it tended to be my bit. She's stealing my thunder.
I've stolen it. I'm going to come for all your PBs.
Absolutely. One by one, I'm just going to tick them all off now. But yeah, so I start, and again, and it's funny because I think a lot of the conversation, I will wrap up soon. Again, I don't want to take up all your time, but a lot of the conversation I found really interesting today, and that bit about pressure and the pressures that are exerted on us everywhere. So I'm going to talk about this tip, and then I'm actually probably going to negate everything I say. I don't really train anymore. I've done marathons and stuff, but I just go out and run because I enjoy it. It's good fun. I don't really bother about pace or anything. But I said to Carmen a few weeks ago on our podcast, I'm just going to do a half marathon training program again. I'm not going to do a half marathon at the end, but just do some of that kind of, the interval training and hills and this kind of scientific approach to it. Let's do that again. And I started it, and I actually really enjoy it, but I'm also completely conflicted because tomorrow I've got a goal-paced run, which means I've got to run at the pace that I need to do my half marathon at if I'm going to hit the time. And I've got probably 4 or 5 different training runs over the week, and 3 of them might be easy, and then there's a couple of timed ones. And the timed ones, I genuinely get anxious about the night before, and I'm thinking, it really doesn't matter. I'm 58 years old. I ain't going to win any races now, but still, I'm going, got to make that time tomorrow. So I'm not totally sure it's a great thing, but I do love the app.
It's actually really interesting what you say, because I used to run casually. And then a friend of mine suggested, he said, you need to sign up for a race because that's what motivate you to be more disciplined. And he was absolutely right. But then it goes back to what you were saying, right? If we are doing it because it's fun to be outside, because it relaxes you, then why are we putting so much pressure on ourselves?
Is it just human nature, Theo? Is that what it is? Are we just all crazy? Are we just like to drive ourselves into the ground?
I think it's that. It's that I think humans naturally are competitive.
Yeah. I think that's what drives me for sure. Like, I love seeing that I've been faster than the week before. I mean, I'm sure at some point it's going to become really hard. 5 weeks in, it's quite easy to beat my personal bests and stuff, but it feels like a little challenge against myself every day, like I'm playing a game.
The fantastic thing is, just when you get older, you know, actually, there's no chance you're ever going to be. You just put them behind you.
Yeah, I've started at a good age.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, no. Now you get told. I get told by my son that he runs faster than me. So I'm like, go for it. Go for it, child.
This has been fantastic, and you have set the bar incredibly high. So thank you ever so much, Theo. It really has been an absolute pleasure. I knew it would be from reading your posts, and it's been a joy to talk to you today. Carmen, do you want to just finish off by letting people know where they can find us? And we're going to have to work hard to find a guest like Theo now.
Yes, so we are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Is that everything? I think so. And if you want to email us, hello@wonderfulpodcast, and let us know how you're doing good. Sorry, I've just forgotten our strapline. Doing good, doing well, or being well always gets me. Then we'd love to hear from you. If you want a guest on the podcast as well, please drop us an email. It's hello@wonderfulpodcast.com. And then, Theo, I don't know if you want to let people know where they can find you, and we'll obviously post all your links below as well.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest, Theodora Lau, and unconventionalventures.com. Thank you so much for having me. It is truly wonderful, no pun intended. Appreciate it.
Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you so much, Theo.
Thank
See you soon.